Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and understand the articles relevant for your examination, be it for your prelims or for your mains exam. So if we take a look at the topics today in total we are going to cover 9 different topics, 3 of them in slightly greater detail relevant for your mains examination, and the rest of them we shall be browsing through with the relevance for the prelims exam. So here, the first one, the Gaza war and the Global South's intervention. Now this is a follow-up story to the already things which we have covered with regards to that how the overall international approach has been when it comes to the war in Gaza. So this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then, building blocks. This is about the increased relevance of BRICS in the face of a global world order where the Western world has been ridiculing the groupings like BRICS and talking about the irrelevance of it. So, this meeting of BRICS at Kazan actually indicated that its relevance, if anything, is increasing. Why is it so? That is something we will analyze with the help of this article. Again, relevant for your GS paper 2. Then trachoma eliminated as a public health problem. What's next? Now, this is again a follow-up story, but this is a larger article presented in the science section. Now, yesterday we had covered about the fact that Kala-Azar and trachoma have been eliminated. So, what are the safe strategies, as it is referred to SAFE strategy? What is the WHO prescribed standard for the disease to be considered to be eliminated? Those are the things that we are going to look into it, and what is the way forward. So this is relevant for your GS3. Then cost of games. This is about the shortened list of games which shall be included in the Commonwealth Games going ahead, and which will cost dearly to India in terms of the medals and the medal scoring ability that India can achieve out of this. Then India-Germany discussing military logistics support agreement and co-production of defense equipments. And that is something which is going to be forwarded and probably concluded during the German Chancellor's visit to India, which is ongoing as we speak. Justice Sanjiv Khanna appointed as the next Chief Justice of India. The 51st Chief Justice of India has been appointed. Government approves railway projects worth around 6,800 crores. The purpose of that, and what is the purpose it will solve? October Flash PMI signals a rebound from the lows of September. What does that mean? Then Potash supply nears pre-war levels, producers cut output. Now, with the help of this, we shall basically be taking a look at the various different potash suppliers across the world, and that can be important for your prelims examination because potash is a very important raw material for the agricultural industry. Now, there are certain news stories today with regards to Cyclone Dana, but because we have done a separate YouTube video on that, so we are not going to cover this. I hope you would have seen that video for Cyclone Dana. It is uploaded in the geographer section, and there is another article associated with the stubble burning. But that is very political an article regarding the political mudslinging between the political parties. So what we are going to do is, today we are going to come up with a video with regards to stubble burning problem in India. What are the legislative issues due to which the farmers are basically forced to burn the stubble? What is the alternative that they have? And why is it that the stubble is burnt only in the region of Punjab, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh? That is again something that we will be covering in the video. The Groundwater Act of Punjab, which has triggered it all, and the lack of crop diversification. So the overall aspect of stubble burning shall be covered in a separate video. We shall be coming out with the video today evening, so do watch out for the space if you want to understand the problem of stubble burning and why is it that year after year this remains in news despite the various different interventions by the different governments. So having said that, let us start the discussion and initiate the discussion with the first topic of the day, that is the Gaza war and Global South's interventions. Now, Global South. First of all, that is a terminology that you oftentimes hear about. That Global South, India seeks to be a leader of Global South, the Global South Summit, the vibrancy of Global South is important for global upliftment. What is this term Global South? So the term Global South in itself, you see, there are multiple proponents of this. Two individuals are credited with making this term very popular. Now, when we talk about Global South, it is basically a combination of those particular countries which have not been developed or which are lagging behind in the developmental race. This term gained momentum after, first of all, it was coined by Carl Oglesby. He is credited with providing the terminology. After that, you had German Chancellor Willy Brandt. Now, Willy Brandt popularized this particular term by talking about the interventions of the Global South and the need to develop the Global South. So, the erstwhile German Chancellor and Willy Brandt has always been taken a look as a statesman, and he was amongst one of those first German state leaders who talked about the post-war repatriation and also the rehabilitation, everything that Germany had caused damage to the world, so he admitted that. So Willy Brandt was always considered to be a statesman. So Willy Brandt was also the one who popularized this term based upon the report that he published. So, based upon these individuals and their aspect of grouping the countries in terms of their developmental ladder and the position on the developmental ladder, that is the aspect of the Global South, first of all. So, the first aspect of this is the Global South's intervention that is addressed. What do we understand by that? Now, when we talk about the Gaza war, you see, now, the more than an year has passed since the onset of the Gaza war, since Israel's war began. Now, initially you had the chief of Hamas who was killed, that is Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in Iran. After that, Yahya Sinwar has been killed recently. Now, Yahya had always been seen as the chief architect behind the end and the chief mastermind orchestrating the entire October 7 attack, which killed more than many people in the region of Israel. So that is why after the killing of Yahya Sinwar, now where does this war go to now? So there is a significant amount of divergence even within the countries of the Global South with regards to the stance that Israel needs to take and the path that the Israeli state is following. So here, three countries have been analyzed. So let us understand the diverging approaches of the prominent nations of the Global South. Now, when we talk about Global South, the most prominent countries are what? You basically have China and India. But then again, countries like Brazil, countries like South Africa, they also pack a significant amount of weight in terms of their voices being heard across the world. So starting with the approach followed by country like South Africa. Now you see, South Africa in itself has got a very bitter experience of apartheid and violence. So South Africa actually took the most dramatic routes of all the various different countries. South Africa went to the doorsteps of International Court of Justice and then talked about the war crimes being committed by Israel and wanted the court ruling against Israel. So this is where it basically took it to the court, International Court of Justice. So you can imagine, if South Africa is dragging Israel to International Court of Justice, it sees Israeli actions as very, very harmful, very, very damaging. And it wants Israel to be punished out of that. Then you have the approach by China. What is the approach by China? Now, approach by China is much more measured. Over the past year and a half, China, or in fact over the past year, China in its various press briefings, in its various meetings, has never used the term Hamas, has never basically criticized the terrorist activities which have taken place. So China has been taking a very, very measured approach for the past year. And this is in tune with the larger Chinese agenda and the larger Chinese process of seeing itself as a goodwill ambassador of the Arab world. And that is where the Chinese actions, the previous Chinese actions when it comes to the global sphere, they have been foretelling. For example, China, with so much amount of media glare previously, had also offered to be a mediator between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And that provided it with a kind of a global heft. China wants to be seen as a global superpower. And you cannot be a global superpower if you cannot bring warring factions onto the table and make them agree on a point of agenda. So China wants that portrayal of the image to continue. It was, in fact, China who also hosted the various different factions of the Palestinian leaders and urged them to unite. Now, with the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, with the killing of Yahya Sinwar, all that grouping and the unification as envisioned by China, that in itself is put in jeopardy. But then, even in the BRICS summit, which was being held in Kazan in Russia, China basically asked for a greater or a more stringent terminologies in the declaration, Kazan declaration, against Israel and the acceptance of the state of Palestine. You had the induction of new members like Saudi Arabia into the BRICS forum. Now, India was not very keen for that. Even Iran had been admitted. Now, India was not very keen on that. But then India stood the chance of being isolated and left out, and China ensured that these countries are admitted. So China is positioning itself as the goodwill ambassador. So China is not saying anything, not doing anything so as to harm the Arabian sentiments or the sentiments of the Arab world. It is very careful of what it speaks. And also, its support to Israel is also very, very limited or restricted in the sense that China sees, as the world also sees, Israel as a kind of an extended arm of the US interests. There is an increased bond between US and Israel, and that has continued for a very long period of time. And China, as it is positioning itself as the other superpower, different from the US, it is also seeking to distance itself from what it terms as the proxies of the US. So that is where the China's stance is about in the interests of the Arab world. Interests of Arab world. Now, the other main country in the global south, that is India. What has been India's approach? Now, you see, India looks at the entire episode with a very different kind of a mindset. We have to keep in mind that India has largely been and always been a supporter of the two-state solution. India has been a supporter of the state of Palestine. India basically has had a very vibrant and strong relations with the leaders of the Palestinian Authority. So India has been a supporter of that. But then, still India is seen in the global circles as a tacit supporter of Israeli actions. And there's a reason for that. India sees what happened on 7th of October last year as a plain and simple terrorist attack, nothing else. And India could trace the entire aspect of the terrorist attack to something that we have been experiencing time and time again. For example, Yahya Sinwar, who is considered to be one of the masterminds and the chief architects, you see, he was also imprisoned and jailed by Israeli authorities. And he had been jailed a lot earlier. But then, at one point of time in 2011, for the exchange of Israeli prisoner, or rather an Israeli soldier who had been imprisoned, Yahya Sinwar had to be released from jail. And once Yahya Sinwar had to be released from the Israeli jail, After that, he has wreaked havoc on Israel. And that is something which has resulted in severe actions on October 7th. Now, India traces this as a kind of a very similar action that what we have faced. If you remember, we also faced a similar issue in the case of Maulana Masood Azhar. Now, there also, we basically faced an issue whereby we had to release him from our prisons in exchange of the hostages. And after that, the entire founding of the JEM, and after that, the increased attacks that Masood Azhar has caused on India, and the impact has something which has scarred us. So that is where India sees it as a terrorist attack, and India basically positions itself as a support for Israel. Not in terms of what Israel is doing in Gaza, not in terms of the amount of damage that has been caused. India still calls for the use and the importance of dialogue on the negotiating table in order to reach any particular meaningful and useful agreement. But at the same time, India is mindful of the fact that these terrorist offshoots that you have, they can always rebound. So that is where India is seen as tacitly being supportive of this. Now you see, we have talked about the approach taken by South Africa, approach taken by China, and approach taken by India. All three are quite divergent. Now these are major nations across the world. And it is here that the global South's own agenda is seen to be partisan in a way that even when all these nations come on a common platform like the BRICS summit, etc., they still advocate what their own thinking and what their own perception of a particular issue has been. So that is why, going ahead into the future, the voice of the global South, the perception of the global South, and the approach taken by the countries of the global South are going to be a determining factor in terms of deciding where the global conflict goes. And the follow-up article about the BRICS summit will further cement the fact. But then, this voice of Global South, which had largely been ignored by the Pax Americana world, or the world which revolves around America, now that world is increasingly under danger. You don't have the Western powers being that dominant anymore. And more importantly, the other countries don't see the Western powers and the Western interests as a binding force upon them. So that is where what we have to take out of this article is that moving ahead into the future, the voices of the global South, the interest of the global South, and the perception of the global South is going to drive the global agenda and the global governance. That means what? Increased trade relations with the global South, increased coordination and cooperation, multilateralism, all of this need to be taken into consideration before any kind of decision on the global governance is taken. Okay? Now, let us take a look at the practice question which can be framed from here. So, global conflict shall increasingly be determined by the voices of the global South. Elaborate citing examples. Now, such kind of questions are very common in the exam nowadays. Now, how do you write the answer in this? Think about it for a moment. In the introduction, do you start straight away with you have the conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, you have the conflicts in West Asia, Middle East, so global South countries are important for that? No. There is an elephant in the room in terms of this particular question that needs to be addressed first, and that is the term global South. Use that in the introduction. Use the introduction to solve that particular term. So in the introduction, you talk about the term global South was coined by Karl Oglesby and then made popular by the German Chancellor Willy Brandt, representing countries which are still in the category of developing and underdeveloped nations in terms of socio-economic progress. That's it. Very brief, but that's it. Now, after that, you talk about that the global South represents close to around 1/3 and more than 1/3 of the global population. And basically, represents a larger public opinion across the global citizenry. So, the interest, the perception, the matters, and the overall understanding of any global problem by the countries of the global south is something which is going to determine what? Trade matters. For example, what do we see? Earlier, you had the case where any particular country could be punished by the Western forces by the threat of sanctions, by the threat of economic isolation. Today, what do we see? You have Western sanctions on Iran, you have Western sanctions on Russia, you might have sanctions on other countries, but if the global south is ready to negotiate with them, if the global south is ready to engage with them, then these countries can survive. So there is an alternate model mechanism for them to survive. People-to-people contact is getting stronger day by day. And that is where the more aware citizenry, they are also ensuring that only one model, the Pax Americana model, is not always followed. So here you give the examples, for example, in the case of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You talk about the fact that Russia-Ukraine conflict is seen very differently by the NATO members as compared to the members of the Global South. Members of the Global South still want to engage Russia, maintain good relations with Russia, as a consequence of which Russian trade is something which has continued. And economic sanctions against Russia have not worked. Sometimes it can be a disadvantage where a particular country can be very difficult to isolate because it can always engage in less developed countries, weaker economic countries. It can always engage with them. So that is one of the aspects, one of the perspectives. The other perspective can always be that this will ensure that there is an alternate mechanism in the global order, providing resilience and providing the aspect of global multilateralism. Okay. Now, in the conclusion, what do you write in such kind of an answers? How do you conclude such an answer? You talk about the fact that India, being a voice, a prominent voice of global south, understands this and needs to take a leadership role when it comes to various different agendas of global governance and global importance, and needs to be decisive in terms of what the principles that it stands for. That will increase the authenticity and the reliability of not only the entire global south grouping, but also increase the importance and the prominence of countries like India in the global world order. Like that, you can conclude the answer and fetch good marks. Okay, try writing it on your own as well. I hope this is understood. Now, after that, next article, that is building blocks. So, this is about the BRICS summit. I hope nobody has any questions from the previous article. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. Now, after that, we come to the next article. This is about the aspect of the BRICS summit, which was held in Kazan. Now, you see, there has been a lot of reservation, a lot of ridiculing, in fact, for the portion of when we talk about BRICS grouping and the BRICS summit. There has been a lot of ridiculing from the Western world that what is this grouping? This is a kind of a joke. You have countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa coming on the same platform. They do not have any military strategy. They do not have any kind of cooperation. They do, in many of the parameters, in many of the issues, they don't see eye to eye with each other. So how can this be a meaningful grouping? The recent BRICS summit, which was held, that tended to defy that Western public opinion. Because when the Western world thinks about a grouping, it is unable to come out of the NATO mindset that any grouping to be successful, that needs to be a military grouping. And that is something which is a legacy of the post-World Wars. During the World Wars, you had alliances only for the military benefit. Now, BRICS is unlike any of those. Now, majority of the issues associated with global governance, which has an impact on the larger citizenry. For example, issues of climate change, the principles of common but differentiated responsibility, the principles governing the aspect of alternate institutional mechanism for financial lending and financial help, the aspect of food security, the aspect of medicines and healthcare. Now, this is where these countries, they oftentimes come on the same platform. Now, this Kazan declaration, which was issued, and the coming together of various different, about 30 leaders of the global south, that also in a way deflated the Western idea that Russia and Iran have been completely isolated. Right? Because as we talked about just now, the imposition of economic sanctions have not worked that much because the countries of the global south, they don't follow the Western ideology anymore, as would be the case maybe in the 70s, the 80s, or even up till the 90s. They have their own independent public opinion based upon the national interest that these countries have. For example, take the case of India. India no longer is ready to toe just the line which is posed in front of it by the Western nations. We are a member of the groupings like Quad as well. And that is where the Prime Minister's statement at the closing plenary, that marked a significant aspect, where the Prime Minister remarked that BRICS is not a grouping against someone. BRICS is a grouping which is inclusive. It is for a global good rather than forming a grouping. And what basically was the meaning of it? That we are not a NATO alliance. We are not a strategic military alliance. We are not against one of the enemy. We want a global welfare. Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. So that is basically where the BRICS tends to gain. Now, regardless of whatever was being written and whatever the popular public perception in the Western world was, there have been evidences in the declaration which indicates that the acceptability of groupings like BRICS has been increasing across the world. So, what are the evidences which indicates that the acceptability is increasing? First, induction of new members. Any grouping, how do you measure whether it is still popular or not? If more people want to join it. And that is something which was seen in the recent SCO summit as well, Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit as well, and also in the case of the BRICS grouping. You have Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, UAE and Saudi Arabia. They have been added. Now all these nations, they want to be a part of the alternate mechanism as promoted by the Western world. So that tells you that they see it as a viable alternative. Then representing a third of the global GDP. So it is not some random countries with very poor economic might, etc. who are joining it. It is a significant global heft we are talking about. Then there have been various different aspects in the Kazan Declaration talking about the interbank cooperation mechanism, grain exchange, cross-border payment system, the BRICS bank, the growth of that, and making it a much more prominent financial institution used for developmental works, used for borrowing for those particular countries where the Bretton Woods Institute, the typically Bretton Woods Institute like the World Bank and the IMF, they have been ignoring the poorer countries. So that is where this is being seen as a kind of a positive, the reimposition of faith in BRICS. Now, why is it that the BRICS is more attractable for various different countries? Why it is more attractive, rather? So, there are certain reasons. There is an increasing frustration with the old world order, where the voice of all is never being heard. It is still, the Western world is living in the post-Cold War scenario, where the world talked about a unipolar world order. That means you only have one superpower. And that superpower will drive the global agenda. Now, if let's suppose you are on bad terms with US regarding anything, then even when it comes to climate finances, you won't be given the loan. Even when it comes to, let's suppose, the loan from IMF, you won't be given the loan. If you want to carry out a developmental work for the society, let's suppose a welfare measure like nutrition, World Bank will not lend you money for that. But if you are on good terms with US, right? Regardless of whatever the human rights abuse, etc., that you are carrying out in the territory. But if you are on good terms with US, virtually all the financial banks and the financial institutions of the world, they would open up and roll out the checks for you. So this old order, driven by one superpower, that is something that the world is tired of. That tomorrow, without consulting anyone, the US can come up and say that I want sanctions imposed against these countries. You should not carry out any trade with these countries. So that is where, are we going to follow entire diktat, even on the verge of risking our national interest? So that is what the countries are weighing in. Now, the BRICS is seen as an inclusive grouping where everybody is getting a stage. The countries which have been ignored by the Western world and the so-called global North, they are getting a platform to represent their opinion, to voice their reservations, to talk about what the problems they face. And giving that platform in itself can be a very empowering device in terms of making the countries feel special, feel important, and also a part of the Committee of Nations. Now, it is also a stage for discussing bilateral issues. On the sidelines of the BRICS summit, you had various different bilateral meetings. Even Indo-China bilateral meeting happened after a very, very long period of time. You had the representation from Palestine, representation from Iran, all of them. So you had bilateral between India and Iran as well. That provides a relevant platform for the countries to basically mend their sticking issues. That is something that in the present day and age, even UN is failing to provide. During the UN General Assembly, you don't see that much engagement, meaningful engagement, not in terms of the photo op, but meaningful engagement between the countries. That is also lacking. This is the reason why these alternative groupings, the so-called groupings as termed by the Western scholars, they are on the rise. So regardless of whatever aspersions are being cast, whatever doubts are being sowed, that this is a grouping which is going to fail, this is a grouping with no particular agenda, no particular coordination, these can be, the multilateral groupings can be a way forward for the divided world. And that is where consensus seeking between these developing countries and the members of the Global South, that is going to decide the agenda of tomorrow. Okay? Now, taking a look at the practice question, strengthening of BRICS suggests a changing global governance mechanism. Comment. Now here, again, how will you introduce the answer? So when you are trying to write the answer in the intro, what do you write? The global governance, either you can start with the global governance or you can start with BRICS. Now, BRICS is a grouping which was coined by the economist, and then you talk about that it consists of the countries Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and other new member nations, which consists of close to around 40% of the global population, and also or almost half of the global population, and also at the same time represents a third of the global GDP. After that, in the body you talk about that the countries, they appear to come on a similar platform or have a similar agenda in terms of issues like the global governance, issues like the global governance reforms, issues like climate change, issues like food security, issues like health for all, and that is where the agenda is common. Now, the strengthening, there have been evidences that the groupings are strengthened. What are the evidences which tells you that there is a strengthening of BRICS? You talk about. So what are those evidences? Whatever is indicated by the Kazan Declaration. After that, a change in global governance from a unipolar to a multilateral world order, that is the change or the paradigm shift that you have to talk about. Okay? And then in the conclusion, strengthening of these multilateral institutions is the way forward to restore faith in the global governance. Otherwise, the world risks a complete alienation from any global consensus making, and a chaotic and an anarchic world order is something which can be expected, right? So like that, you can conclude the answer. Clear cut. Why America play a vital role if Global South inclusive? I think your question is that why does America still play a vital role if the Global South is inclusive? That is because regardless of whatever we might say, still the largest economy is what? America, US. The largest military power is what? US, by a very far margin, a very far distance, isn't it? So it will still be very important voice in terms of shaping the overall opinion. It is not a declining power. When you have a declining power, then people stop listening to it. But it is US is still, by any means, US is not a declining power. US is a status quoist as of now. It is maintaining its global heft, global hegemony. So it will have a significant amount of financial heft in terms of influencing the opinion of the other countries. It still has the military might, offers security to other countries, and that is where the opinion of those countries are also shifted. So voice of America will always matter in terms of global governance. But should that be the only voice which should matter? That is where the coming together of multilateral institutions like BRICS, that is important because it can offer a counter narrative. In many issues, it can support the US stance. Even in the BRICS grouping, what India voiced, that is something that India had voiced even from US. During the last month's UN General Assembly, India had voiced similar opinions. But then the entire grouping represents an alternate voice and an alternate mechanism which promotes multilateralism. Okay? Now, then the third particular article, that is trachoma eliminated as a public health problem in India, and what next? Now, while this article starts with the fact that we talk a lot about other issues in our country, right? There are various different headline grabbing media articles and media reportage which covers the entire spectrum of the day. But when it comes to achievements that India makes, and this is a mighty achievement that India has made in terms of eliminating trachoma, so that is not being talked about, that is not being celebrated enough. It needs to be understood what a massive achievement it has been. So when we talk about trachoma, trachoma is a disease, bacterial disease, which can cause permanent blindness as well. It basically causes eye infections, and repetitive eye infections will impact the eye lining, and then eventually the rubbing etc. of the eyes etc. that gets red, that causes corneal damage. It can cause blurred vision, and it can also cause permanent blindness. Now, this article analyzes that while the disease burden has been lessened, when we say eliminated, what do we mean by that? So eliminated basically means eliminated as a public health problem. It is still not eliminated as we compare the cases like polio. Polio is eliminated from India, right? You have one or the odd case and that grabs national headlines. So trachoma has still not reached that level as polio. So there is still some monitoring, some work which needs to be done. Right. So first of all, a quick recap of what we also looked at yesterday about the disease trachoma. So when we talk about trachoma, so it is a disease of the eye caused by infection with the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis. Okay. So Chlamydia trachomatis is the one responsible. This is relevant for your prelims. Now, what happens? You have the eye infection, and that infection spreads through personal contact and eventually even by flies who have been in contact with the discharge from the eye or the nose of an infected individual. Bodily fluids will carry this bacterium, and that can be carried by the flies and the other vectors as well. With repeated episodes of infection over many years, you have blurred vision and you can also experience permanent blindness. Now you see, in the case of trachoma, when we talk about the comparison in the year 2005, India basically accounted for, or trachoma accounted for, was responsible for 4% of all blindness in India. Okay? And when we talk about it now, that is in 2018, this had reduced to 0.008%. So from 2005, when trachoma alone was accountable for 5% of all the blindness that India experiences, it has reduced to 0.008. How? And what was the process followed? So WHO has provided what is referred to as a safe strategy. What is that safe strategy? So the safe strategy prescribed by WHO follows the basic guidelines. Now you see, trachoma is a neglected tropical disease. Neglected tropical disease means, why neglected? Because it is not a part of any global agenda with regards to the development of vaccines or greater research about how to eliminate that disease. Because the poorer countries, the countries which are down in the economic ladder, they have the poorer social or socio-economic agenda or socio-economic condition. They have poorer hygiene, lack of clean drinking water, the dirtier conditions. So there these diseases are very common. The developed world doesn't experience these diseases. And as a consequence, you have these particular diseases which are neglected, tropical. You don't have that much. Even vaccine is not there for trachoma. So eliminating the diseases like trachoma is considered to be a major aspect. And this is also something which meets SDG goal number 3, Sustainable Development Goal number 3, subpart 3. Right. Now, what is that safe? Surgery to contain or correct trichiasis. Trichiasis, where your vision is impacted. This is when you, let's suppose, get infected, multiple repetitions of the infection, and as a consequence, your vision in itself gets impacted. You have a kind of a inclined vision of sorts. So that is trichiasis. So for that, surgery could be carried out. Antibiotics to treat and control the infection. Facial cleanliness to reduce the transmission so that the germs are not present on your face for a long time. Because in general, people, when they put their hands or the fingers on their face, if it carries a lot of germs, that can easily spread over. Environmental improvements like access to clean drinking water and sanitation. So all these are something which has improved the situation. These are the actions which have been taken. Now, the WHO's criteria to consider the disease to be eliminated as a major public health problem. What is the criteria? The prevalence of the disease falls below 0.2% in people aged 15 years and above. Okay? Active trachoma in children aged 1 to 9 years is less than 5% in the endemic nations, where the disease and the bacterium are to be found. Right? Where you do have the sources of infection. So only then it is considered to be eliminated as a public health problem. Now all this has been achieved significantly with the help of the health workers, what should be credited as a source of the success. So health workers. Secondly, the government initiatives like the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and ensuring that you have open defecation free areas across the different parts of the country. Now, it is still a work in progress. It will take some time, but then that cleanliness which many places have actually adhered to and have observed, all these play a major role. But then this is not the end of the fight. One has to understand that once you have a disease which is considered to be eliminated as a major public health problem, you have to ensure that it does not come back. How do you ensure that? So there are certain ways like regular monitoring, isn't it? You have to keep on monitoring where any particular region, let's suppose, where the disease can again have an outbreak. And now that the prevalence is very low, case by case basis, it can be eliminated. For example, any individual, let's suppose one individual in the state of Madhya Pradesh is suffering, or few individuals are suffering. Do the contact tracing for those individuals. We have gained that expertise during the time of the COVID. Do the contact tracing, isolate those contacts and put them on the antibiotics so that in each one of them, this particular bacterium is killed. And then what will happen? We will be able to eliminate that. Then, after isolating the disease, what we just talked about, then after that, you also have the role of ensuring and maintaining more cleanliness. A cleaner environment has to be maintained for the long run. So clean water, sanitation, and overall cleaner environment. All these factors, they have to be maintained and ensured with a great amount of vigor. Only then we can have a cleaner environment. Okay? Now we come to certain articles relevant for your prelims. So basically, starting with a portion which has appeared in the editorial section of the newspaper, and that is the cost of games. Now you see, there has been a recent decision whereby the Commonwealth Games, the next slated Commonwealth Games, are supposed to be held at Glasgow in 2026. So those Commonwealth Games will now have lesser number of games in the entire activity or in the entire process. You have many different games such as wrestling, badminton, you have wrestling, shooting, badminton, table tennis, right? Table tennis, hockey, squash, cricket, all of them have been removed. They have been removed from the list of games which are present. Right? Now, the purpose behind this is very simple. What has been cited by the Commonwealth Committee, the purpose is very simple. And the purpose is basically that you have reduced viewership, and as a consequence of that, the cost which is involved in hosting all of these games, they are not very justifiable. Now, country like India will lose quite significantly. There is an analysis where if we consider the previous Asian Games, previous Commonwealth Games rather, our overall medal tally of 61. Now, more than half of it came from these particular games. Now, you will have a restriction only in the region of athletics and para-athletics, the para games also. So this is where we have to understand that why this has been done, in order to curb the cost of hosting the games, in order to operate so many different games at simultaneously and declining viewership. Okay. Why tropical diseases are neglected by the developed world? Nandita Gupta. That is basically, Nandita, because of the fact that once you don't suffer from such diseases and you don't have a threat of suffering from those diseases, then why will you care for them? The richer countries or the developed nations, they know that they don't have the problems of dirty backyards or dirtier environments, open sewage systems, etc. So they know that even if an infected individual comes into their country, that contact tracing can be done immediately, which is done, and that disease is not allowed to percolate further. So that is why they do not pay attention to them. And why would the and even when you consider the pharmaceutical companies of the world, the large pharmaceutical companies of the world who basically have the capacity to develop vaccines. Now, they will develop vaccines for richer people who have the, and richer countries who have the ability to pay more. Right? Why would they develop vaccines for the poorer section of the world who won't be able to pay them as well? We have seen that during the time of the COVID pandemic. While the world was dying, you had companies like Pfizer, Moderna, etc. They declined to provide free vaccines to the developing world. That is where our vaccine diplomacy came to the fore. Now, when those vaccine makers themselves are not interested in these diseases, how will you develop the vaccine? Hence, neglected. Okay? I hope that is. Yes, Roger. Testing, but testing only in the case where you have the infections. For trachoma, you cannot ensure an overall testing. We already need to do that, and we are doing that for TB, right? But trachoma, with gentle awareness raising campaigns, we can basically tap that. Okay? I hope that solves the questions that I can see. Now, after this, we come to the second article. So here, India-Germany discussing military logistics support agreement. Now, immediately after coming back from Kazan, after attending the BRICS summit, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and the Prime Minister, they basically have welcomed the German Chancellor. So German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has visited India. And basically, Germany has been again positioning itself to be one of the reliable partners, strategic partners of India. And Germany is exploring the military-industrial complex as a way to do so. That is where, just like US, for example, has got a memorandum on logistics with India, whereby there can be a logistic support provided by the Indian bases, and Indian military can also use the logistic support of the other countries like US, their bases. So Germany is also seeking something like that. Along with that, Germany is also seeking to partner India in terms of and have a deal with India, whereby even the German vessels, naval vessels, if let's suppose they experience any damage, rather than being moved back to Germany, they can be repaired in India itself, as is the case that India and US have that kind of a deal, that kind of a treaty. So this is something which is in discussion. This is something which will be discussed as today, as we speak, the Prime Minister and the German Chancellor will have a one-on-one meeting. And along with that, along with the logistics agreement, there is also an aspect on the table with regards to the defense co-production. Now, Germany is interested in some of the very critical defense projects in India. One of that is the submarines. Now, I hope you are aware that under the Project 75I, India is seeking to build conventional submarines, right? Now, this is different from the nuclear attack submarines of the Arihant class. This is a kind of a follow-up to the Scorpion class submarines that we had built. Right. So this is kind of a 75I with more indigenous content and with some greater technological advancement like air independent propulsion, where the submarines can stay underground or underwater for a much longer period of time. They still will operate on the conventional fuel like diesel, but they will be much more efficient, much more stealthier in terms of they would create much lesser amount of underwater noise. So this is where, along with the Spanish company Navantia, you also have Germany's TKMS, which is competing. Then another area where Germany is seeking an entry into the large Indian defense requirement is that of the cruise missile development. So that is where also MBDA rather, that is basically competing. Now when it comes to cruise missile, This is not something that any country is seeking to export, or even India is not seeking to import cruise missiles as of now. We have our own arsenal of cruise missiles. You have the subsonic, supersonic, and now we are going for hypersonic in BrahMos too. We have the supersonic in BrahMos, we have the subsonic in the aspect of nearby. So we have various different missile arsenal. It is about co-production and jointness that these countries are looking for. This also is, by the way, an indication of the maturing of Indian missile industry and Indian defense infrastructure with the decades, where earlier the developed world again never even thought about supplying us the missiles, let alone co-production. But nonetheless, this is a kind of a relationship which India also seeks to be favorable, and Germany positions itself as one of the reliable strategic partners of India. Then, Justice Sanjiv Khanna appointed as next Chief Justice of India. He has been appointed as the 51st Chief Justice of India, and this is basically, he is appointed by, who is the Chief Justice? Who appoints the Chief Justice? It is the President, right? So President basically appoints under what provisions? Under the provisions of Article 124, Clause 2. Okay. Now he has previously served in the High Court, and basically he had served in the Delhi High Court since 2005 onwards, elevated to Supreme Court in 2019. Now he was by the collegium chosen by Ranjan, or the collegium headed by Ranjan Gogoi. That is when the Sanjiv Khanna was actually promoted, and he was not amongst the senior most judges at that point of time, but he was still promoted owing to his integrity. He is also well known for certain famous cases, for example, providing bail to the Chief Minister, the ex-Chief Minister of Delhi, Arvind Kejriwal, before the elections to carry out campaigning. That was provided by Sanjiv Khanna. And even he was the one of the judges in the bench deciding about the Article 370. Okay. Now, government approves 2 railway projects worth 6,800 crores in the region in the region of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Bihar. Now, what it will do, it will reduce the railway congestion in the existing line, because it also includes the doubling of the lines. For example, in the northern Bihar region around Sitamarhi, Muzaffarpur, Darbhanga, this is a flood-prone area. So, doubling of lines would ensure that easier movement of goods can take place, which can also ensure there is an agrarian development in those backward areas of the country. And along with that, there can be increased passenger movement also, which can happen. So that is an important project for that matter. Even the connectivity to Amravati from the surrounding area is under this approval, which has been provided. Now, October Flash PMI signals modest rebound in activity. What is the Flash PMI? So we know that PMI basically refers to Purchasing Managers Index. It is a kind of a survey which is carried out with the industry leaders in order to understand that where you have, or how many new orders that you have, how many, what is the sentiment overall, the number of employment that you have provided in your company. Now that gives an idea about the overall sentiment of the market. Now PMI, that is something which is registered as, or basically formulated as a number. A number less than 50 means contraction. A number equal to 50 means there is no expansion, no contraction. A number greater than 50 is good, means the economy is expanding. Now, Flash PMI means what? That you basically have 85 to 90% of the respondents of the overall PMI survey, 85 to 90% of them, they are asked to respond. And that gives you an idea about the overall indication of the PMI for the following month. So October is still ongoing. So obviously the complete data of October will be released somewhere in November. This is a Flash PMI survey to indicate what is the condition, where the economy is heading, what is the economic barometer as of now. So in this, there is some rebound which is being seen, because in September, the PMI had dipped to 56.5. Mind you, it was still expansive, 56, but it had dipped as compared to the previous months. Now, in the month of October, it is expected to hit around 57.4, which is good, which means there is a rebound. It is not that much, but it is again on the increasing scale. In the case of services, now this despite the fact that the producers overall have led to an increase, have basically created an increase in their prices of goods at an unprecedented rate as compared to the previous 11 years. For that matter, the price rise has been, for the goods manufactured, that has been unprecedented, and that is owing to the commodity pricing across the globe, the global supply chain shocks, the rise in the fuel prices. So the case of excessive monsoonal rains concentrated in certain months. So all of this has led to a sudden price jump, but still there is some amount of demand in the economy. Now, when we talk about the services PMI, so in that case, the Flash PMI for services, there also from September, in September it was 57.7, it is to be increased marginally to 57.9. Which tells you that going into the festive season, there is going to be an economic expansion, and obviously there will be greater demand, but that is something which we have to ensure is sustained in the next quarter as well. Now, coming to the last article. Potash supply nears pre-war levels, pushing producers to cut output. So when we talk about potash, potash is a very, very important mineral for that matter. It is significantly used as agricultural input and also as a commodity for various other industries, raw material for other industries as well. So that is basically where you need potash to be provided to the global order. Now, the potash was one of the commodity where the Russia-Ukraine war had led to a spike in price. But then the increased supply from Russia, from Belarus, and even from the non-conventional suppliers like Jordan, Canada, and Laos, the supply has been increased, due to which now the producers are cutting down the supply. So the price has moderated, and now the producers are cutting down the supply. So for your prelims, what do you need to know? Largest supplier of potash in the world. So here, when we talk about it, the largest supplier amongst that, you will have Canada, right? This is for last year, then followed by Russia, then followed by China, Belarus, Germany, Israel, Jordan, Laos, Chile, and so on. So Canada is the largest supplier, followed by Russia and China for potash. That is something you can associate with for the prelims. Okay, that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. If you have liked the video, please do not forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. And I would suggest you to do visit our Telegram channel, Telegram page, and take a look at the multiple choice questions which can be framed from the topic and try to put the correct answer. Analyze how you are in terms of scoring ability for the prelims type multiple choice questions. See you again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.